Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'm going to be showing you how unbelievably insane a nearly perfected Ball Lightning Sorcerer can be. As you can see, you can absolutely blast even through tier 100 Nightmare dungeons, easily doing them in under a minute while being nearly unkillable, having unbelievable damage output, and by far the most mobility in the entire game. Not only is it by far and away the best build in the game for speed farming, but you can super easily melt bosses such as Uber Lilith, killing her basically instantly without even really dedicating the setup to much boss damage at all, and even being able to kill Uber Duriel in a matter of seconds, both solo and in a full group while the boss is scaled up to 4-player health with nobody even helping you. This is by far the best build in the game, and it isn't even remotely close in my opinion, just because of how versatile the build is, how fast you're able to move, how much damage you do, the fact that you can get like unbelievable amounts of survivability pretty easily too. And personally, there's just nothing more fun than spamming teleport, flying through dungeons, and just doing any piece of content in the game literally 3 times faster than any other build, and just nuking the entire screen while doing it. It's a crazy amount of fun, and I had an absolute blast pretty much perfecting the build, so I just wanted to go over that with you guys today. Before I get into things, I want to show you guys a fantastic way to find and even create new builds. With today's sponsor, Mobalytics, you can download the desktop app completely for free. It's pretty fantastic. You can actually people post new builds here pretty much all the time. They have tier lists. You can look at meta builds, but a new feature that they added is community builds. So you guys could even make your own build and then post it, and then it actually gets upvoted. So you can very easily see, even if you don't trust any of these people that are posting builds, you can look at the community build section and you'll be able to see new metas that form pretty much right when it happens. There's a ton of builds on here, and you just get a lot of inspiration from being able to look at different things. So for example, I'm pretty interested in making Barbarian. I want to see, a leveling build, but I'm also interested in what people are doing at the high end. So I might be interested in seeing whatever this Upheaval build is, because Upheaval is pretty fun. And then I could take a look at it, blah, 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 see all the information, Paragon Board, skill tree, etc. You could also duplicate any of these builds. So for example, if I wanted to fix how awful this build was, I could do a test version of it, and then it's going to open it in like a build planner here. So I can look at everything, and then I can actually edit it and publish it myself. So I can fix all the things that are wrong with this, and there's a lot of them. Anyways, there's a build planner on here. It's awesome. One of my favorite things about Mobalytics is it comes with an in-game overlay. So for example, when I want to level up my Barbarian, I can look at this Whirlwind build in-game and very easily just pop it open, see where I want to spend my new skill point, and then boom, just close it. But also when I'm like, in Endgame and stuff, and I'm ready to look at the Paragon board here, it just very easily opens up right next to it, so I don't really have to fidget around looking at a different monitor or anything. It's just right there. It's just a great way to find new builds, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on here, and I'll probably be posting some builds here soon as well. Getting into things, this video will be quite long and in great detail, as I spent a ton of time optimizing and perfecting the build, and I want to be very diligent with you guys. So if you're not as much of a nerd and you don't really care about all the details, feel free to just reference the build links in the description, which I made multiple variations of depending upon what your goals are. You can also just skip through the video. There are timestamps, etc. If you end up finding it helpful, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. All that YouTube garbage, it helps a ton. Anyways, the build functions incredibly well by default because Ball Lightning randomly received a massive buff this season, in addition to the potential of the skill actually being bugged, resulting in it doing just a crazy amount of damage pretty much right off the rip. Ball Lightning's first modifier makes its damage rate scale off of 200% of your attack speed, drastically increasing its damage output, and this happens to pair perfectly with the strongest vampire power this season, being Ravenous, increasing your attack speed by up to 80%. Pair this with the gravitational aspect, which for some reason is an absolute pain in the ass to get to drop, and you'll be doing a ridiculous amount of damage. Now all you really need is a way to generate a ton of mana, so you can just spam the ever-living crap out of the Ball Lightning key. I'll have a dedicated mana section of the video before I jump into all of the gear, but the majority of your mana issues honestly are solved by the Chain Lightning enchant by itself, paired with the recharging aspect that is available in the codex. Anytime the Chain Lightning just bounces, you'll just get a ton of mana back, which happens pretty much all the time. This by itself, in addition to some stuff in the skill tree, is pretty much more than you really need to have a crazy amount of mana generation. Chain Lightning Enchant also comes with the added benefit of drastically increasing your damage output when you pair it with the Static Surge Legendary Paragon node, which is going to make everything vulnerable constantly because you're casting so many Chain Lightnings automatically. It's also going to give you a bit of mana back, which is pretty nice. For our second enchantment slot, we have a couple of options, which is the main difference between my version of the build and what you see most people running. If there's anything at all that you take away from this video, it is that I strongly urge you to at least try out the teleport enchant, because I strongly believe it is the single best option when doing pretty much any form of content other than just farming bosses when you do set it up right. It also has the added benefit of being by far the most fun way to play the build. Most people right now seem to be running the Ball Lightning enchant instead, which has a very low chance to spawn a static Ball Lightning on the ground. In my opinion, this is kind of close to useless because they typically spawn once the mobs are kind of already dead, and you already cast so many Ball Lightnings per second, having a chance to get an additional one that is stuck on the ground is pretty low value to me. Even in the best case scenario, which would probably be fighting bosses, I don't see a noticeable difference at all having a couple of extra Ball Lightnings on the ground, so I'm not a fan of the Ball Lightning enchant really at all. Your next best enchant option is Firebolt, which is just to apply burn so you can take advantage of things like Devouring Blaze, damage reduction versus burning, Flame Feeder, Glyph, etc. While this is a rather noticeable damage increase, Devouring Blaze is significantly less effective than it really used to be, so it's not nearly as mandatory anymore, or it's not mandatory really at all, and you can easily just substitute the other benefits elsewhere. Firebolt enchant is definitely better for fighting bosses, but that's only really because Teleport enchant is like literally worthless on bosses. I'd actually argue that you get more damage out of using the Teleport enchant, because when you pair it with the Raiment Chest, every time that you teleport, not only do you suck all of the mobs inward, drastically just increasing how fast you're able to clear the screen and just bringing everything way closer to your big old balls, but you're also constantly stunning everything, so you can reasonably take advantage of things like the Control Glyph, which by itself is a 20% multiplicative damage increase against stunned, but you also get another 24% multiplicative increase with the Domination Vampire power, another 35% multiplicative with the Aspect of Control, and you get over 250% additive damage increase against crowd-controlled or stunned enemies within the Paragon Board, which more than makes up for the loss of Devouring Blaze. It's literally like 5x the value of Devouring Blaze by itself. Not only is it a damage increase for just general dungeon clearing, but you are also significantly more tanky as you permanently have 30% damage reduction up from just spamming teleport, and every time you engage in a fight, you are perpetually stunning everything, so elites can like barely hit you in the first place, and it's just a massive cushion being able to just open up by just stunning everything, and most stuff will just die within a stun. And obviously, stuff can't hit you if you're stunned, right? But also, because you're spamming teleport so often, you actually have pretty much permanent uptime on your barrier, which is very good for survivability, as well as giving you higher uptime on 2 of your damaged legendaries that are conditional on you having a barrier active. All of that, and I haven't even mentioned the fact that nothing in the game competes with the mobility of having 2 teleports that you can just spam constantly to absolutely fly through maps. You can literally go through terrain with teleport, which is just really, really nice, but it's also by far one of the most fun things that I've done in this game. If all of that and the gameplay that you've been watching this whole time hasn't sold you by now, then I'm not really sure what will, but I'd highly urge you guys to at least just try it out. If you weren't already aware, basically what a teleport enchant does is it just replaces your evade with a teleport that is on a long cooldown. However, this cooldown actually gets reduced by increasing the ranks of your teleport as well as cooldown reduction. So it says 11.2, but right now it is about an 8-second cooldown for me because it is being reduced. And I'm also missing cooldown reduction on an amulet, which we'll talk about. You can actually drastically reduce the cooldown of this simply just by using attacks reduce evades cooldown boots. As you can see in the gameplay, because Ball Lightning hits so many times per second, you are pretty much instantly resetting the cooldown on your teleport by simply just hitting enemies. This makes it to where you can pretty much rotate indefinitely between your normal teleport, which is going to be a very low cooldown anyways, and then your spacebar teleport, so you can constantly, while in combat, be spamming your teleport to stun everything, but also when you're outside of combat, you can be teleporting away from enemies, etc. Real quickly, I want to go over some things that people were spamming me about in the comments of my previous video and just mention why I don't think it's worth it. So Metamorphosis, a lot of people typically use with this build, but if you're using the teleport enchant, Metamorphosis is worthless because it just removes the teleport enchant, which is the whole point of the build. Metamorphosis is actually good when you pair it with the Oculus, in my opinion, because this basically makes it to where the Oculus random evade teleport enchant thing is no longer a problem, and you're able to just spam the spacebar normally because Oculus gives you maximum evade charges and attacks reduce evades cooldown. So this helps you get to the same amount of mobility as the teleport enchant, but in my opinion it is just an inferior version of the mobility because you don't get the added benefit of constantly stunning everything, etc. You get maybe a little bit more benefit out of Tibalt's Will via the gain primary resource, but that's about it. You basically lose a teleport enchant, and then you lose a good bit of damage by having to use the Oculus, which means that you lose a legendary and you lose some of the stats on the weapon, which is not a great trade-off in my opinion. And unfortunately, by using Oculus paired with Metamorphosis, you aren't able to take advantage of the cooldown reduction via Flicker Step. So if you wanted to use Flicker Step paired with Metamorphosis to have a low cooldown on your ultimate, you aren't really able to spam the spacebar that much because you're missing out on maximum evade charges and you only have attacks reduce evade cooldown. So it ends up being really clunky. And if you use the Oculus paired with Flicker Step, it just doesn't work for whatever reason because it counts as teleport, but it also counts as metamorphosis. I don't know. Basically, I think that both of these versions are just a inferior version to teleport. They do exist, but Flicker Step paired with teleport also does not give you the cooldown reduction for the ultimate. When it comes to skills we're using, obviously we are using Ball Lightning. Unstable Currents is nice for just additional increase in damage. However, a cooldown on this is going to be pretty long with the way that I have the build set up. You can build into cooldown reduction for it, and you can have decently high uptime, but without Flicker Step, it is hard to have very high uptime on Unstable Currents. Teleport, obviously, don't even need to talk about that. Flame Shield is good for an immunity, and it gives you a little bit of movement speed. Your other two skills are literally useless. It doesn't matter. You can put on Frost Nova just to stun stuff or free stuff every once in a while. You don't need it for vulnerable anymore, so it doesn't really matter. You have permanent uptime on a barrier anyway, so Ice Armor is pretty worthless. Feel free to just put anything on that you really want, but honestly, these last two skill slots don't matter at all. Skill tree I'm going to speedrun because it is just in the build links, and it doesn't really matter that much. There's not too much variance here. You go for Firebolt, just you have to put 2 points here, so whatever. You go 1 into Dev, 3 into Elemental Dominance for damage. Chain Lightning is nice because you get Destructive Chain Lightning, which gives you Crackling Energy, and Crackling Energy is going to give you a lot of extra mana, which is our main other source of gaining mana. Max out Teleport for cooldown reduction. Flame Shield for the movement speed. 1 point to Elemental just for a chance to reduce Flame Shield or Teleport every once in a while, which it actually does proc a good bit. Glass Cannon for damage. If you feel like you're dying a lot, you can just take the points out of Glass Cannon, and that will help your survivability quite a bit. 1 into Align, 3 into Mana Shield for 21% perma damage reduction. Protection is very nice, and you pair this with the Teleport Enchant, you permanently have the 30% max HP barrier. Conjuration Mastery is pretty worthless. You kind of just have it on because anytime you have your ult active, you spawn a lot of Lightning Spears, so you do get a bit of damage value out of this. But if you wanted to put, like, I have ranks to mastery skills on my Amulet. If you don't have that, you just take the points out of Conjuration and put it into, Frost Nova, Ice Armor, or maybe Ice Blades or Lightning Spear if you want to use something else. You also just don't even have to put anything else on your bar if you don't want to. Something that you could do if you wanted to increase your bossing clear time is you could put Hydra on your bar, and then you could actually put the points into Devouring Blaze so that you have higher boss, or you kill bosses a little bit faster. Kind of thought about it literally right now. It doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll start doing that, but who cares? You kill bosses in like 3 seconds anyways. Then we max out Ball Lightning, get Wizard's Ball Lightning for more Crackling Energy for more mana. Invigorating Conduit is fantastic. This also scales with Resource Gen. Very good. Static Discharge to spawn a little bit of extra Crackling Energies. Unstable Currents with the second upgrade for the 25% increased attack speed. And then 3 points into Coursing. You could probably take the 2 points out of this. It doesn't really matter that much. I probably will. Maybe I'll just put it into that. I don't know. You could put these 2 points wherever. It doesn't really matter. And then we have 3 into Conduction for crits increase your movement speed. And then Electrocution, which just gives you a lot of additional damage reduction. When it comes to the capstone, some interesting things that I'm probably going to make a separate video on. I was doing a whole bunch of testing, trying to figure out how attack speed works, trying to figure out all this stuff, and inadvertently, I figured out that 1, Veer's Mastery doesn't give you a damage increase at all. You do get the damage reduction benefit out of this, but the damage increase doesn't work. And 2, Esu's Ferocity damage increase works for all skills, not just fire skills. Thanks to Northwar for also testing this and making sure that I'm not a dumbass. And yeah, it turns out that Veer's Mastery doesn't work, and Esu's Ferocity doesn't work, or works too good, rather. So we got a double bug going on here. That was fun to try to figure that out, because I was like, why am I doing more damage not using this thing? Whatever. So basically, you can use Esu's Ferocity if you want to do 25% increased crit damage all the time, which is really good for damage. Or you use Overflowing Energy to have much more cooldown reduction on Unstable Currents, as well as your normal teleport, which this does actually help you a decent bit, but it's not anything insane. Or for T100s, you can use Veer's Mastery for the damage reduction benefit paired with 1 legendary, but generally, I think most people are just going to go for the damage, so feel free to do that. Overflowing Energy is nice for speed clearing, and Veer's is good if you need the defense for T100s. I've just been using Esu's just because I like the damage, and I like seeing big Numby, right? When it comes to our vampire powers, there's 3 that are mandatory, I think, and then the 2 others you can kind of just swap around. So let's talk about the options. The first one is Ravenous. Insane. You get a lot of movement speed, which then scales into attack speed. Attack speed increases Ball Lightning's damage. That is very good. Next up, we get Domination, 24% increase damage all the time, or when enemies are stunned, which we are constantly stunning via the Raiment Chest. Prelude Weak for just 16% multiplicative damage. You could decide to forego this one, I suppose, but it's a pretty nice damage increase. Next, I have Undying, which I really like for survivability. You could argue this is not necessary, but when you're doing poison maps, having the healing is very good, and you will often heal through damage that you otherwise wouldn't, or otherwise would die to rather, just because you're spamming ball lightning so much. But this is one that you could forgo if you feel like your survivability is good enough. One that I recently incorporated, which somebody actually told me in a Twitch chat would be pretty good, is that I put on Sanguine Brace for Fortify. This is basically because it gives you 8% crit chance when you have it leveled up all the time, but also the Fortify gives you, I think, 15% damage reduction, which overall for T100s, the damage reduction is actually pretty nice. And I typically, or previously to that, I was using Resilience for just damage reduction for each percent of life that you're missing, which I kind of still think is good, but a lot of the time in T100s, you kind of just get one shot, not really getting low HP. So Resilience in T100s at least didn't really seem all that good, but Sanguine Brace did help me, but also you get the damage benefit out of 8% crit chance when it's leveled up. So I think that's pretty good for damage. Alternatively, you could also use Anticipation to just reduce the cooldown on your Unstable Currents, which is very good when you pair it with Overflowing Energy, and you're just doing easier content, not T100s, and you just want higher uptime on your ultimate. You can kind of use any mix of all of the ones that I mentioned. There's not really anything set in stone other than Ravenous and I guess Domination. Everything else, feel free to just play around with. But currently for T100s, this is the setup that I've really been liking, and I pretty much haven't died since I've had it set up like this. But if I wanted to be even tankier, I would take Prey on the Weak off and just put on Resilience, and I'd probably be just, oh my god, unbelievably tanky. Real quick, I'll talk about mana because I said I would do a mana section of the video. There's a lot of different ways to get a lot of mana. Most of them are redundant. I personally am only using a recharging loop, and I've been using one at 1.5 this entire time, and I haven't even been playing with Tibalt's Will in the gameplay that you watch because I got Harlequins. Talk about that in a bit, but this is my only source of mana paired with things in the skill tree, and my mana has been perfectly fine. So starting off, obviously, recharging loop. Each time Chain Lightning bounces, you gain mana. Using the Chain Lightning enchant, so it bounces all the time. That's a lot of extra mana. In the Paragon Board, Static Surge also refunds some mana, and you get more uses out of this with more mana cost reduction on your gear. In the skill tree, you get Crackling Energy, gives you 12 mana. You spawn Crackling Energy via Wizard's Ball Lightning, as well as Static Discharge, as well as Destructive Chain Lightning. So there's a lot of Crackling Energies on the ground that you pick up for mana. Tibalt's Will is very good for mana as well if you feel like you need it. Anytime you become unstoppable, you instantly gain 50 of your primary resource. You become unstoppable via pressing Teleport, or by pressing Flame Shield, or alternatively using Metamorphosis if you don't want to use Teleport enchant, whatever. Other ways to get mana is with the Prodigy Legendary. Each time you use a cooldown, it gives you mana. That does not work with the Teleport enchant, so I took it off. I no longer use that. I don't really think that it is necessary. Another way to get mana is with Lucky Hit Chance to restore primary resource. It's pretty good, and it's kind of free on the gloves. You don't lose all that much damage, and it seems to help with consistency a lot. One of the best ways to increase your mana generation, however, is literally getting Resource Gen, which you can get on multiple pieces. You can get it on the Focus, as well as on your rings, and if you happen to have Harlequins, you also get it on there. This basically just scales up how much mana you gain from recharging loop. So if my recharging is at 2.5, and let's say that I have a total of let's just say I have a 40% resource gen increase, I'd have 2.5 times 1.4, 40% increase. So now my recharging loop gives me 3.5 mana each time that it bounces rather than just 2.5, which is really good. And also I'll get more value out of Tibalt's Will. I think it works for Chance to restore primary resource, but I'm not sure. And it also works for Crackling Energy. Those are pretty much all the ways that you need to get mana back, but personally I've only been using Recharging Loop with Resource Gen on my gear, the Lucky Hit Chance to restore resource, and I don't even play with Tibalt's Will anymore, and my mana has been perfectly fine. Let's talk about Legendaries and how you want to set up your gear. There's a couple different ways to do this based on if you're doing T100s and if you have Harlequins or not. As this is a perfected version of the build, I have Harlequins, and I'm going to mention how I set it up like that, but most of you guys aren't going to have that, in which case you want to just use a normal legendary helmet with Disobedience on it for survivability. A lot of people recommend Godslayer Crown for your normal helmet when you don't have Harlequins. However, I don't think that it's worth it. It's very good against bosses, but as a result of using it, you lose a lot of defense because then you have to move Disobedience over or take it off entirely. This helmet is pretty terrible. Just don't look at the stats, but usually you'd have like armor, max HP on here. So you lose the armor, you lose the max HP. Actually, you keep the max HP, so that's fine. But you lose the armor. Armor is one of your main sources of survivability. So that's a little bit unfortunate. But also, this is a very long cooldown, and I also don't really think that you need all that much damage. It's good for bosses when they pop out. You pretty much insta-kill them, right? But That's kind of the only value it has. But also, a lot of people will move Disobedience over to their Amulet when they use Godslayer Crown, which means that you lose the damage aspect on your Amulet because you're using a unique item in your chest piece and your pants in the form of raiment, as well as Tibalt's Will. So overall, I would recommend just using a normal helmet for most forms of content, and if you want to like cheese kill Lilith or something, you can just hot swap to Godslayer Crown, whatever. Like I mentioned, this is the most important thing for the build, raiment, because we're constantly spamming teleport. You can get this from Lord of Zir or Echo of Varshan. You can kill those guys, and they will drop it for you. Very good. Don't really need to talk about it. The most important legendary is the gravitational one, where ball lightning orbits around you. This is a pain in the ass to get. I'd recommend getting a good pair of gloves and just slapping it on there so you don't ever have to worry about getting another roll. The build doesn't really function all that well without this, but once you get this, plus you Codex recharging loop, the build pretty much works automatically. Tibalt's Will is very good. You'll get this from killing Duriel if you do him. He drops it literally all the time. I don't use this anymore, and I'll talk about that in a second, but this is very good for a 40% damage increase pretty much all the time, and it gives you a lot of additional primary resource. Another added benefit of using Teleport Enchant and not using Flicker Step is that you gain normal legendary boots, which have, while unstoppable, gain 25% increased movement speed, and you can move freely through enemies, which is very good against bosses. You can walk directly inside of the boss so that all of your balls can hit the boss more, so that is pretty nice. And then to round out the build with just some damage stuff, I have Elementalist, which isn't insane or anything, but it is pretty good. And you have a lot of additional mana with the build, so 40% increased crit chance is pretty nice, especially when using S's Ferocity, because that is a crit damage multiplier, so you do want to be critting. You have very high crit chance, especially with Sanguine Brace, you have nearly 100% crit chance with the build. Aspect of Control is very good, so you do 35% increased damage to stunned enemies. Conceited Aspect, 25% increased damage while you have a barrier active. And Stormswell Aspect, I put on the Amulet, so it goes from 30% to a 45% damage increase while you have a barrier, which is a ton of additional damage. The alternative way to set this up when you get Harlequins is to slam Harlequins on, then you lose your Disobedience, so then you have to put Disobedience on your pants, and then you gain Ranks to Ball Lightning, which is roughly 20% of a damage increase. You put Disobedience on the pants, and then you keep an Amulet with Stormswell on it, and then I swap to an Amulet that has cooldown reduction instead of ranks to defensive skills, and then I put total armor percent on instead of the ranks to glass cannon, specifically for T100s because it is a massive amount of survivability. Alternatively, you could put Disobedience on your Amulet here, and then you would have to lose one legendary, which I would probably lose Elementalist or Aspect of Control, and then I would keep Tibalt's Will on for the damage increase, but I found that I prefer the survivability version of this, but this is irrelevant for 99% of you guys until you get Harlequin Crest. Keep in mind that that option exists. When it comes to the stats that you want on your gear, on your helmet, you want total armor percent, maximum HP, cooldown reduction, and then you can get something like intelligence or all stats. On the chest, you just have a raiment. On your gloves, you want attack speed, crit chance, those are two most important, and then you can get either intelligence or lightning crit damage. I think intelligence is better, and then you can get lucky hit chance to restore primary resource, which I think is very good. On the pants, most of you guys will be using Tibalt's Will, but if you want a more survivable version of the build, you want pretty much what I have: total armor percent, damage reduction from close enemies, and the Ranks of Ball Lightning makes it to where you don't lose out on as much damage because it is effectively 20%, so that's pretty good. And then you keep Disobedience on here so that you don't have to put Disobedience on your Amulet, so then you keep a damage legendary. On the boots, you want movement speed, mana cost reduction, ranks to teleport, and then you can get, instead of movement speed after killing an elite, you would prefer to have something like damage reduction while injured. You could also get intelligence if you wanted some damage. On your weapon, you want to have a dagger because it has damage to close implicit. You want intelligence, all stats, damage to close, and then either vulnerable damage or mastery skill damage. On your focus, you want to have cooldown reduction is the most important in my opinion, and then you want resource generation is very good, crit chance is very good for damage, and mana cost reduction is probably your god roll. So instead of my intelligence here, I would rather have crit chance. On your rings, you want pretty much this for a damage version: crit chance, lightning damage, damage to close, resource gen. Your lightning damage could alternatively be vulnerable damage as well, and the resource gen is very good. Or you could decide to swap out the lightning damage for max HP for more survivability. With the Amulet, you have a lot of options. I think the god roll is kind of a mix of both of these. It depends if you want to do T100. If you're doing T100s, the total armor percent is pretty much mandatory. I'm able to get to almost armor cap by having armor in my gems, Disobedience on the pants, total armor percent on the pants and the Amulet there, and armor cap is pretty much mandatory for T100s if you want to not die. But Otherwise, I would say always go for movement speed. That's very nice. Scales into attack speed, and playing the game without movement speed is kind of miserable. Always go for ranks to mastery skills because that's just straight up damage for your ball lightning. 3 ranks is probably roughly 16%, but it depends if you have Harlequins on or if you have ranks to ball lightning because there's diminishing return with the ranks to skills, blah, blah, blah. Either than that, you can go for ranks to defensive skills, which will reduce the cooldown on your teleport, but cooldown reduction is more effective for reducing the cooldown there. And then if you want straight up damage, ranks to glass cannon I think is 18% increased damage, which is pretty crazy, but that comes with a massive survivability loss. So instead of ranks to glass cannon, if you wanted just more damage instead of the armor like I have, you could go for intelligence percent, or you could go for elemental dominance, which I think would be about 9% increased damage, or the total armor percent is very good. That's what you want to look out for on the amulet. And when you have the build perfectly set up with the Harlequins on, my teleport is a 4.6 second cooldown, which is pretty nice, and I have just a crazy amount of resource gen. I'll show you guys all the stats real quick if you are interested, and let's also talk about resistances. So these are all my stats, blah, blah, blah. If you want to just, I don't know, pause it or something, whatever. There you go. My resistances are nearly capped out, and that is with not having any diamonds on, and this is because of the way that I set it up in the Paragon board. I specifically went and got as much all resist as I could so that I could put armor in my jewelry, so I'm near close to armor cap with disobedience in T100 Nightmare Dungeons. Resist would be a little bit higher if my amulet was 925. If you're like, a little bit off of resistance cap, you would just swap pretty much one of these skulls with a diamond. When it comes to the Paragon board, this version is for T100 as well as maximizing my all resist. I will have a version for not T100 that goes a little bit more into damage. I've tried out a lot of different Paragon boards and done the math on them, and I think this is the best way to retain a lot of damage as well as a good amount of survivability. So in the first board, I have Adept maxed out for increased area on your mastery skills, which is your ball lightning. I have all the resist, all of the non-phys damage here. And then I go into Static Surge. I grab all of the damage versus stunned, which is really good with Raiment Chest. And then I slap in Territorial to max out the damage to close, as well as you get 15% damage reduction against close enemies. The last board that I put in is Frigid Fate. You get a 20% damage multi here, which is really good, and you get damage reduction versus vulnerable enemies. If you wanted more survivability, you could lose a bit of the damage that I have in one of the boards and gain even more damage reduction versus vulnerable, which I went into a little bit more random dex nodes just so that I could grab the breakpoints here. And I also have all stats on a lot of my gear, which helps me grab these breakpoints. And then I have Control in, which is 20% increased damage and a lot of extra damage to crowd controlled, which is really nice. And then I have, what is this board? Enchantment Master. This looks a little bit weird, but I grabbed this all resist just so that I could put the armor in, and this is specifically for T100. It's not a ton of extra points, but I quite like it. I grab all the non-phys damage, which scales into the Frigid Fate board. You also get some max HP, which is nice, damage to elites, and then I have Reinforce in here for 15% damage reduction when you have an active barrier. I learned that Tactician actually does not work for the damage increase, so you'd rather just get the 15% DR, and this also buffs your all resistance as well as your non-phys damage, as well as getting more int, which is really good for damage. And then I have Destruction Glyph max out here, massive amount of crit damage, and then this board is pretty good for damage because there's some lightning damage here, and there's also a pretty massive damage to elites board or node here. And again, if you wanted some more damage, you could take the points out of this like all resist and go into more damage to elites, or you could just take some of the points out of damage and go into more damage reduction. But this kind of middle ground is what I really liked for T100s, but there's definitely better ways to get a little bit more damage, but honestly, you kind of one-shot everything anyway in very low tier content, so getting more damage is kind of irrelevant in my opinion. Alright, so now I'll just do a random T100 just to show you guys that the build works pretty much all the time. I'm going to actually try out putting Firewall on my bar, and I'm going to Firewall a boss to apply Burn, and then I actually put on Ranks of Devouring Blaze in the sculpture here, which is funny that I literally just thought about that, but if I wanted to do more boss damage, that's a pretty good way to do it. When it comes to playing with the build, you pretty much just spam teleport, and you just spam your buttons, and that is pretty much it. There's a little bit of a ramp-up time, as you can see, but once you get going, you're going. I accidentally just pressed a firewall there. I guess it's nice to burn stuff, I don't know. You can pop your ult whenever you want if you just see like, a really tanky elite or whatever. Feel free to just pop it. You'll have much higher uptime if you're playing Overflowing Energy, but I am not. And popping the ult is particularly good for the boss. Oh, I got a Butcher. Alright, well, we'll try to kill the Butcher. Butcher is very tanky in T100s, but as you can see, my survivability is quite nice. Try to keep the burn on him for the Devouring Blaze. Drifting Shade hit me. As you can see, the survivability is pretty nice. A Butcher could definitely kill me. And the single target damage is not as good as if you were to spec like full into single target damage, because so much of our damage is against crowd controlled. But I mean, that was perfectly fine. A Butcher is like 5 times tankier than Uber Duriel is when you're in a T100. I keep randomly pressing Firewall because I'm just bad, but yeah, the build's pretty easy to play with. I don't have Tibalt's Will on right now, so my mana isn't as good as if I were to, but this is for T100s, and specifically just so, like, you know, I don't ever die. And my mana is pretty good regardless, right? Like, I'm able to just fly through here and pretty much kill stuff, and this is if I wanted to, like, actually kill everything. If I want to just, like, you know, blast through the dungeon at Mach 10, I'll have some gameplay of that to show you guys. But, yeah, I mean, build is pretty straightforward. You kind of just spam your teleports, and you can just pop, like, Flame Shield anytime you feel like, I don't know, you don't have survivability. Sometimes a lot of your survivability is based on, like, Disobedience being active, right? So popping Flame Shield right when you jump into a pack is good because your Disobedience won't really be all that active. But I guess a benefit of adding Firewall is that you can keep your Disobedience up pretty good because it'll just burn enemies, and that's pretty nice. And you can just, like, walk into a pack and pop it, and I guess you get a lot of Disobedience stacks that way, but yeah, I don't know, kind of redundant. As you can see, though, you're able to pretty easily just go through a T100 without really any problem. Every elite just gets one-shotted. This map is kind of annoying with the Animus carriers because the Anima drops, like, so delayed, man. I'm kind of playing like a noob because I'm trying to describe stuff, but I mean, I don't know, you guys get the gist, and there's so much gameplay at the start of the video that I'm not sure that you really need any crazy gameplay right here. Sometimes when you're moving in between packs, you don't have, like, a teleport able to be used, but I mean, that's perfectly fine because when you're actually in packs and going between, like, pack to pack like this, you're able to spam pretty frequently, and that's good enough for me. Metamorphosis can sometimes be a little bit faster going from pack to pack if you have the Oculus on, but I don't think the downsides of using Oculus and not using Teleport Enchant are anywhere near worth the fact that you can sometimes conditionally move a little bit faster through maps. We got a Halal's Vigil, that one's pretty fast. This dungeon is kind of boring. I kind of like it normally, but everything is kind of just dying a little too fast. And sometimes I don't like it when stuff dies too fast because your mana doesn't feel as good, and you don't get as much of a cooldown reset on your teleport and stuff. It's like, it's almost like you get too much damage, and it becomes a problem. I don't know, here, I'll try out the Firewall tech. So we'll Firewall, pop around Sable Currents, I'll just blast in there, I'll Flame Shield off the Drifting Shade, and the guy instantly died. I didn't even see my damage numbers really go up, having the boss burning with Devouring Blaze, but I guess it's a little hard to tell. You kill stuff so quickly anyways. I'll just leave you guys with some other gameplay of... I'll leave you with a Sanguine Chapel, because I actually kill stuff in that place. I'll leave you guys with the Sanguine Chapel, and then I'll leave you with the quick Belfry that I was able to do. I literally haven't looted another Belfry since then, and I'm not trying to sit here and just grind out a trillion T100s. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the build. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching. If you did, drop a like, blah, 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 and I'll see you guys later. Peace.